In this tutorial, I want to talk more about the basics, what I consider to be the basics, and how I coach people when they work with me, either face-to-face or online. Now, a lot of people misunderstand when I talk about the basics. People have their own interpretation of the basics, and they tend to, if I say basics, they go, "Oh, I know what the basics are because I've learnt those before." Now, as a general rule, my basics tend to be slightly different to that. There will be some things that are the same, but there will certainly be some things that are different. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And with regards to the people that I work with a broad range of people. So I work with beginners, so people who are new to exercise or fitness or sport. And I also work with people that are more experienced than that. So you could describe them as beginner and advanced if you want to call that. I've worked with retired professionals, I've worked with professionals. So there's lots of, there's a broad range of people. But what I've been able to glean from that is that there are certain basics that each of these populations are missing. And as a general rule, they overlap into each other. So I've tried to find those common basics that people are missing from any of those groups. Now, it comes down to these 4 exercises. So you've got the plank, you've got the side plank, you've got the bird dog, and you've got the bridge. Now, obviously, you're seeing them just down in the corner here. I'm also seeing them on the screen just over here. So as I work through this, I'm bringing it up on the screen so I know where I am with regards to what I'm talking about and the slides and the text that I'm sharing with you. So we've got those 4 exercises. As you can see, plank, side plank, bird dog, and bridge. Now, those are 4 exercises that a lot of people know. So if it's a beginner that's in the gym, they might not know those exercises. So what the plan is to teach them the basic exercises. When we start school, we learn the basics. We learn how to count, we learn the alphabet. Then what we learn to do is with the numbers, we learn to add and subtract. With the letters, we learn to put them into words. If we then continue the letters on, we learn to put those words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs into essays or books or whatever. So there's a progression to it. So that is essentially what I'm doing with these types of exercises. So they are the most basic exercises, and not only are the most basic exercises, but what we're also trying to do, or what I'm trying to do when I talk about the basics, is teach people certain skills within that. Now, these certain skills are universal, so they go through all exercises. But I want to teach them those skills within the most simple ones, because if we can lay the foundation, we can then build on top of that with harder, more complex, greater capacity, things like that. So it's very much trying not to throw people in at the deep end, but we're trying to walk them in from the shallow end up to the deep end. That's my thinking behind it. Obviously, the metaphor of letters to words, words to sentences, sentences to paragraphs, paragraphs to essays, that type of thing. So it's that type of progression that people are on when they work with me. Because what I find is people can, or I say they can do, they can perform complex exercises or hard exercises, but they don't perform them correctly, if that makes sense. They can sort of do the movement, but they can't really do the posture of the body. They can't feel the muscles working at the right time, and all this type of stuff. So there's a little bit more thought that goes into it. So if we come on to slide number 2, and as I've mentioned, they lead on to big movements. So this simple exercises are moving on to bigger and more complex exercise. So I'm moving from simple to complex, rather than throwing people in at the deep end, from complex exercises to simple exercises. Now, a lot of people will chase the cool and exciting and complex exercise because they see it on social media, they see it, people doing it in the gym, and they want to do it as well. That's absolutely fine. But what they tend to miss are the core skills, which I'll talk about in a second. And what we're doing as well is we're learning specific skills within these exercises. So they aren't the end in mind, they are a means to the end as well. So beginners, they might be the end in mind because they might be enough, but with more advanced people, we have to regress them, learn the skills, and then progress them forward into the exercise that let's just say they're more used to. They build a foundation of health. Now, what that means is they give you a margin for error. So if you are working at a high capacity, you are more vulnerable to more vulnerable to injury as you fatigue. So if we've got a bigger margin for error, then we are at less risk of injury, if that makes sense. We can minimize compensation because we're learning these skills, we're learning the basics first. So when we need to call upon the basics, we can call upon them quite easily and quite quickly because we've got that ingrained in how to do them in our brain. So we can call on that. And then, as I've mentioned already, that reduces risk of injury because if we compensate, we're putting our body at greater risk in the place that we're compensating. So if we've got tight upper back, tight hips, we're going to compensate in the lower back, which is going to cause us problems there. So if we can move from the hips and move from the upper back, we're going to put less stress on the lower back. That's going to minimize risk of injury. Again, and also we are giving ourselves a greater margin of error. If we don't do this, we've got a finer margin of error and we're putting ourselves at more risk of injury. What we've also got is normal core training exercises have a negative payoff. Now, I've mentioned the plank, the side plank, the bird dog, and the bridge. Now, these are, as I've mentioned, the most simple exercises. They also have the least negative payoff. A sit-up, for example, that has a negative payoff in the fact that it's a spine-bending exercise, and spine-bending, flexion, extension in full range is an injury mechanism for a disc. So we want to try and avoid that as much as we can. It's the same with twisting exercises like a Russian twist that delaminates the spine. The fluid is then able to, the fluid on the inside of the disc is then able to move through the disc and eventually can create and help contribute towards a disc bulge or a disc herniation. So we've got this negative payoff with many exercises. So if we learn these 4 exercises first and then we progress out into squats, deadlifts, sled drags, sled pulls, whatever it is, we are then minimizing that risk. And as it mentions here, spine bending exercises can damage discs or facet joints and fatigue the muscles, leaving them more vulnerable. And it should say to injury at the end there. So, as I've mentioned, we're putting ourselves at greater risk of injury. So, who benefits from this? Well, as I've mentioned, beginners. They need to learn those basics. Their body doesn't have and I see this a lot. I've worked in many gyms. I've travelled around the UK teaching in gyms, and I see this a lot. There are beginners doing, let's just say, advanced exercises, and it's quite clear to see they can't hold the posture. Their body doesn't have the robustness and the resilience to hold the correct posture. Their muscles aren't strong enough to hold them in that position. They're working at a capacity that they're falling all over the place, and that's leading them to greater risk of injury. If we build them from the bottom up rather than the top down, what we're giving them is a greater potential to get the most out of these harder, more complex exercises. So that's such a big part of, and I keep repeating it, such a big part of what I'm doing is just walking them in at the shallow end and not throwing them in at the deep end. And then you've got regular exercises. I don't like to put the label of they're advanced, because the advanced would sort of, I don't know, let's just say, it might say that they've already understood these skills. Most of them don't. The ones that I work with, they can, they're great runners, but they don't have a great foundation. They seem to be at regular risk of injury and things like that. That shows that they just don't have these skills. And as I said here, I've worked with many of these that don't have the basics. So it's very much thinking of it in that way. So what does it involve? Training the body to cope with load. So we're starting simple. So we're taking these beginners, let's say, and we are teaching their body and their brain to hold the correct postures. And then to do it at a load and a capacity that they're able to do, and then progress over time. Because again, if you watch people doing complex exercises, their posture is all over the place as long as you know what the correct posture is. Their ability to perform it for a long period of time, they fatigue quickly and they won't get the most from that exercise. But it seems like it's a cool thing to do because everyone's doing it on social media or whatever. but it also trains the mind to cope with complexity. Now, one thing I will do is I will get people doing slightly more complex exercises than they can possibly cope with. The reason I do that is I ask them a specific question. I ask them a general question. Where can you feel that working on your body? And most of the time, their answer is, I'm just trying to complete the movement. So they can't, if it's a whole body movement, they can't feel what the shoulders are doing or the shoulder muscles. They aren't concentrating on moving from the hips. They can't feel their core muscles working. All they're trying to do is get the weight from down low to up high. Now, what we want to be able to do is when we go from down low, we want to be able to think, right, this is what my shoulders need to do, and this is what they are doing. And as they're then going through the movement in that split second, my core is strong, and I'm moving from the hip. So there's like a sequence to it, and we need to go through that in our mind prior to the exercise, and then during the exercise as well. So then when I ask, where can you feel it in the body? Oh yeah, I can feel that going through my shoulders. I can feel that going through the stomach, and I can feel myself moving from the hip, and I can feel my glutes activating as I do that. That would be the kind of answer that I would be looking for. But as a general rule, people can understand that. So when we regress back, and I get them to just do isolate, rotating from the hips, okay, can you feel, or what can you feel there? Yeah, I can feel my hips rotating. Can you feel your glutes working? I can't this time, but let me have a go on the second set, and I'll see what I can do. As they go through, oh, yes, I can. Now I'm concentrating on that. And then what you do is you build each part of the body. So you then integrate, okay, let's get the core strong. So we can feel the hips moving. We can feel the glutes activating. We can feel the stomach braced. So we're now getting 2 parts of the body. And then what we would do is bring the arms back in, and then we're getting 3 parts of the body. So we aren't only developing the body, we're developing the mind to cope with that complexity that it needs. And then how to do it? Well, we start with 4 fundamental exercises, so we start with those. We then learn the core skills, so we need to be able to breathe. This is something that, as I've described, not only can they not feel the exercise or the body moving through the exercise, if I was to ask them, how was your breathing? They'd be like, I don't know. Or, I wasn't breathing, I was holding my breath. So we need to be able to learn to breathe, we need to be able to learn to brace, and we need to learn to build that endurance to be able to do that over a prolonged period of time. And as I've mentioned, there are other skills as well. So it's gaining gain an understanding of joint awareness. So what are your joints doing? And then we need to do that in a sequential way of 1 joint at a time, and then 2 joints, and then 3 joints. So we're building that as we go. So again, that's how you build complexity in the mind. You don't just start them doing it, you've got to build it. And something that's very simple to do is to move them onto a plank with an arm raise. So this would be for a beginner, or even it would be for an advanced person, is if I had them doing a plank, side plank, bird dog and a bridge, the next step on is to get the arm lifted off, because you can see in the screen at the bottom I've got 1 arm on my lower back. So that would be one extra thing, because what's going to happen as soon as they lift that arm off the floor, their hips either want to shift side to side or they want to rotate. So we need to be able to hold those hips in position. And it's the same with the plank and the side plank and the leg raise. As soon as they lift that foot up, it exposes the bottom hip to hold strong. Because when they put both feet together, they create a loop, which creates a degree of strength. As soon as we break that loop and take 1 foot off the other, it's all down to the hip on the bottom. So we've got to create that, and again, we've got to keep straight line from the shoulder to the hip to the knee. So what I've described here is moving from step 1 to step 2 in these pictures. But I've also mentioned, when we're talking about big complex movements, some of the things that you need to be thinking about. So if it is even just a deadlift, what are your hips doing? Can you feel your glutes squeeze? Are your knees out? What part of the foot are you pushing into the floor? Is it the ball of the foot? Is it the heel of the foot? Is it the entire foot? Are you spreading the floor with your feet? Which basically means, are you pushing your feet out and externally rotating? That's going to engage muscles of the hips. Are you then maintaining that neutral spine? Do you have a hip wink? Is your chest up? Is your head in line? Or are you cocking your neck up as you come down? So there's all these different things that you could be doing that you need to be aware of when you're doing these movements. And you need to build that. So that means possibly starting at a light weight, or starting with no weight and just learning the movement to keep the head in line. So there's all these different scenarios that I could talk about, but I wanted to put the basics in place to build a strong core. And that is essentially what I've put here. Learning those 4 fundamental exercises, but when you do that, learning the core skills. So learn to breathe, learn the brace, learn to build endurance, and just hold that posture over a long period of time. When we're doing something like the bird dog and the bridge, which requires some degree of movement, be aware of what your joints are doing. So are you moving from the hip, or are you arching your back as a compensation for your hip not being able to move? Are you moving from the shoulder, or are you compensating the upper back because your shoulder can't move that far? So it's thinking about all this. That then moves you on to what mobility you have and how far you can move. And then stability, what is your stability like? Are you able to balance? Are you able to time? And when you do the bird dog, are you lifting one leg and then an arm? Or are you lifting one arm and one leg simultaneously? So there's a lot to think about when you're building the basics. It's not just getting yourself on all fours and lifting an arm and a leg up. You've got to think about the posture, and you've got to think about doing the exercise correctly. Now, what I'm talking about is in my How to Build Core Strength and Stability program. There are half-an-hour workshops on all of these 4 exercises. We're talking about the proper teaching points, how to progress, how to regress, and common technique faults. So that's all in there. You also get workouts, you get tutorials, you get other workshops on stretching, on foam rolling. There's all sorts in. There's 6 stages of workout. So if you're a beginner, you start at stage 1 and work yourself through. If you're slightly more advanced, I would still recommend starting at the beginning and working all the way through, but you do then have a license to start a bit further down. So you've got all of that to sort of to help work you through. So if you want to have a look at that program, just go to the link in the description and you can click through and you can find out a little bit more about it. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training. I will speak to you in the next tutorial.